Hello. So my name is Jeremy Barth. I've been coming to these Drupal camps for a number of years. In my own practice, I use feeds extensively. I work for a company that brings in government data regularly, basically on a daily basis. And when we first started doing this many years ago, we were trying to do everything within the Drupal ecosystem. So using rules, which I think is now called ECM, to bring content from outside, transform it, and then import it into our site using feeds. We found that it was a bit clunky doing the data transformations inside of Drupal, so we went off the island, so to speak, and started using a Linux server where we could run our own code, like Perl, Python, you name it, and then simply use Drupal Feeds to bring that transform material into our system. So we've been doing that for many years, and when large language models came out a couple of years ago, we started exploring the possibility of doing things that we had always wanted to do, but just found prohibitively expensive in terms of time and money, which included, and what I'm going to be talking about today, is doing better summaries of material that doesn't have good summaries, extracting information from the material, which is, again, the web is full of unstructured material, PDF files, websites, you name it. And in our case, we wanted to get certain kinds of data out of these government documents. And we had a summer intern from a number of years ago who tried to do something with AI, and it was 50-50 how it worked. But we found that the modern large language models did a bang-up job. And so we've incorporated them into our pipelines for bringing things in. So what I'd like to show you today is not our particular material, but for the sake of this talk today, I focused on the Environmental Protection Agency. And there's a couple of websites I'd like to take a look at and show you what we could do with them. So with that being said, first of all, I'm going to try not to do too much code today, but for anybody who's interested, here's the PDF of my talk, and included in there is a link to my GitHub repo, which for anybody who's interested, you can find the full code for everything we're going to be talking about today if you want to explore it. So the first site we're going to look at is called the Federal Register. And what I want to do is take documents off of here and import them into my site for use by whoever my target audience is. So the Federal Register, for people who don't know, which is most of us, I certainly didn't know what it was, is where the federal government publishes all its rules or proposed rule changes. So the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Defense, you name it. This is where they publish any proposed rules or rule changes. So you can certainly browse through here. This is a very well-designed site. It's actually open source code. There's a great developers portal under here. And so I can go to the developers portal. There's an interactive API, which I'm not going to go to in detail, but basically you'd click try it out, and then you'd select all the different fields you want. And just to give you a sense of what those might be, if we just pick a random document right here, there's a ton of content in here, which is meaningful largely only to specialists. And then from a developer point of view, there's other formats, and I can get JSON. So this is the work that we did, is we started exploring using the JSON here to bring stuff into our system. So where are we going? So let me describe where we're going here. So for this first demonstration involving the Federal Register, where we're going is I want to bring their materials into our system under EPA rule proposals. So there's a bunch of them here. I want to bring them into our system and do just to showcase what LLMs can do these days. If you've played with them at all, you know that you can get them, that they're very good at summarizing complicated text. So break it down for me. So in this simple demo, I thought, let's break it down. Let's take these gigantic, long documents that they've got. This is probably hundreds of pages long, highly specialized for the people who need to know. Break it down for me as if I were a high school student, as if I were a corporate lobbyist, and as if I were an environmental activist. 3 target audiences. So depending on what the purpose of your website is, you can do all of these. So that's the journey. So here is an example of what the Federal Register JSON looks like. So the results are here. I have a few records here, each one of which is within these braces. So I have a Drupal feed, which I'll show you in a second, which is going to look for these fields, and then my feeds map will bring this content into the system. So let me show you a really bare bones feed that doesn't do any AI at all. Let's see. So I have a bare bones feed called Federal Register Direct, which means I'm taking the JSON directly from the Federal Register website. So if I look at the mappings, I have a content type, which I probably should show you. I have a content type. This is a really bare bones Drupal website called Federal Register. And the reason it is its own content type is because it has fields that are unique to Federal Registers, such as the citation, the effective on date, the document number. This is a logical candidate for being its own content type instead of a basic page. So the feed, this is again, it's a bare bones feed. We're going to grab the title, the agency name, the document number, etc., a few fields that are given to us out of the box by the Federal Register. And so if I go over to this is going to be a live demo, folks, so I'm going to empty out, wish me luck, I'm going to empty out everything in here except the home page. Delete content. Yes. Okay, so we have no content in our system. I'm going to go over to the Federal Register Direct feed, and the source is this really long URL here. This is the source, and that really long URL is, if we go back to here, it's this URL here. So again, this URL I constructed by using their API interactive tool. Too many windows. Sorry, folks, I'm losing my windows here. So let me just go to the feed, Federal Register Direct. Here's the URL. I'll just click import. Okay, created 3 Federal Registers. So we can see that. If we go over to content, here we go. Pretty bare bones. We have the date, the title, a little short summary here, not much information. This is as good as far as it goes. but obviously not all that interesting. Why would you do this instead of going to the Federal Register? So now what I want to do is switch to how can you add an LLM into the mixture? So I don't want to spend a lot of time with the Python code, but essentially what you're doing is we're going to iterate over all the results we get out of this URL. And among the fields, which I'm actually not bringing in here, but if we go over to the Federal Register, basically we're going to grab all the text, and so that we don't have to like start prying into PDF files. There's a full text URL. Yeah, here we go. There's a really long TXT file. And if I open it up, it's like, a zillion pages long. It's completely impenetrable. So this is what we want to simplify and break down for the different audiences. So what we're going to do with the LLM is putting aside all the surrounding code for parsing this stuff. The essence of it is we have a prompt. This is our system message. So you are a helpful assistant knowledgeable about in this case there's a parameter for the agency name because it might not be the EPA, it might be the Department of Transportation, it might be the Securities and Exchange Commission. And please do the following. For a high school student, give me a concise summary using simple, straightforward language. And then there's similar requests for corporate lobbyists and for environmental activists. And then because I don't want it to put a lot of extra stuff in that I'm going to need to deal with, just keep the HTML really simple. So this is half of the equation. And again, I can't go into a great deal of detail here, but what I will say is, if you've used chat systems at all, you know that the format of what you get out can be all over the map. Drupal, one of the reasons we use it and we love it is that it eats, lives, and breathes structured content. So LLMs typically will give you lots of interesting text, but it's not necessarily in a structured form that's easy to consume, for example, in a Drupal feed. So what people are doing these days is telling the LLMs, first of all, just give it to me as JSON, because that's a structured format. So let me show you from the command line what that might look like. So in my repo, I have a file called Simple Techniques. Again, you can find the repo in GitHub using that PDF file. So there's a great command line tool called LLM by a developer named Simon Willison, who's he's really big into open source. He's a top-notch Python developer, and he's really doing a lot of amazing things with the command line. So let me explain what this command is doing. and why I'm showing it to you. So this is a simple command line. Again, I'm on a Mac, but this would work on Linux too. Curl is a way of just pulling down a web page. So in this case, I'm picking a document from the EPA, which we're going to get into in the next section of the talk, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to strip the HTML tags off and leaving only the .article div from the HTML, and then I'm going to pass it to an LLM, which in this case I think I'm defaulting to OpenAI, although I might have changed it to Google's Gemini. And then the prompt is going to be summarize the legal points, tell me if there's a penalty and what laws were violated. So this is going to be just pure text output. So if I run this, so I'm getting something that would be suitable for human consumption. This is actually markdown content, but it's not really suitable for a computer. So the next iteration of that would be to just add in a command to output it as JSON. So I'll simply update that little command file here. Please output as JSON. And we'll run that command again. So now we're getting something that is formally JSON, meaning it's a structured output, but it's also not really suitable for import into Drupal. I mean, they're using random field names that aren't necessarily meaningful to us. So that's where you have to sort of tell the LLM exactly what you want. And you can keep going further and further down that particular path. But this is why you might move into a more structured programming language like Python, where you can tell the LLM precisely what fields you want. And again, really quickly, the way people are doing that these days in Python and in other languages is these modern language models have the ability, first of all, most of them have a JSON output mode that you can invoke now. This wasn't true a couple of years ago, and even a year ago, only OpenAI had the ability to do this. But at this point, all the major providers, Anthropic, Google Gemini, DeepSeek, they all have the ability to say, hey, don't give this to me as plain text, give it to me in a structured form. That being said, you still have to tell them what the structure is that you want. And just to give you a flavor of what that looks like, there is, in this case, there is a Python library called Pydantic. I guess that's a sort of a play on the word pedantic. Python is an untyped language, and Pydantic basically enforces typing. So if you want to say something needs to be an integer, like a penalty, it needs to be an integer or a float, or something needs to be text, or something should be a list. Like if we're going to be asking for a whole list of federal rules that you find in the document, it needs to be a list. So Pydantic is great for doing that, and what you can do, and I'll show you a little bit more detail in the next section, but what you do in generic terms is you create something called a model. So in this case, my model is called summary model, and this is a really simple one. I have 3 summaries that should be strings. That's the point. And I'm going to be sending this summary model as part of my instructions to the LLM. And again, I don't want to do a deep dive into the code because that would be a different talk. But in essence, that's what you would do. And just for fun, I created an additional model called news summary. And what it's going to do, the prompt I'm going to be giving the LLM is, so, okay, I've just asked you for the most recent, let's say I'm asking you for the most recent 5 documents. Why don't you give me a summary of them as well? So besides the 3 summaries I just mentioned, the high school summary, the lobbyist summary, and the activist summary, just write me a quick news article that I can use, let's say I'm an editor, that I can use as a point of departure for doing something. I wouldn't suggest that you publish this, out of the box, because that's cheating, but you might want to have it as an aid to what you're doing. So if I go over to my command line and I want to run that, so the code that I was just showing you, if I actually run it, so I'm going to say use as my agency the EPA, anything published after 03/02 of this month, and I'm going to tell it to give me a news summary. So again, this is, let's see what happens, live demo. See, well, this is the problem with the live demo. I'm getting a resource exhausted error. This is one of the problems with using large language models, is they're very popular. So let me try, first of all, to make this go faster, I'm going to maybe get fewer documents and pray that we don't get a 429. Well, this is, I guess, part of the demo, right? That you're dealing with all kinds of stuff, idiosyncrasies out there. I'm using Gemini in this case as my provider. It's actually an option. I've set up accounts with Google Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, and of course OpenAI GPT-4o. The reason I'm using Gemini in this particular case, yeah, we're getting 429s again. The reason I'm using Gemini is it has a very long context window. A context window is the amount of data you're stuffing into your prompt. So in the case of these Federal Register documents, they can be 100 pages long or more. That's simply too much data to fit into the context window of some of the providers. Okay, so we're obviously having problems here with the 429. So because of that eventuality, I did pre-do this for, I did this last night, so I'd have something just in case. So I already do have some JSON files here, which were when the resource wasn't exhausted. And again, Gemini is very popular right now, and you need to set up retries. So I'm going to go over to my feed, content feed. So this time, instead of the Federal Register Direct, I'm going to do the real one, the one that I wrote the LLM code for. And in this case, it's that local JSON file on my own local hard drive. Click import. It says feed. There's no new Federal Register items. Let's see. I'm not sure why it's doing that. So in order to give it a unique title, just for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to change the title. Because I use title uniqueness for the feed. Oh, well, now it just created all 7 of them. So if we go over and we pick, we just look at one of these. So we have a short summary which comes directly from their website. And then we have our summaries. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at this, but let's assume for the sake of argument that the text is fairly simple for a high school student. And then we have the summaries that are targeted at lobbyists and at activists, telling them what they might be interested in. The bolding was simply part of my prompt. I said, hey, ChatGPT or Gemini, as part of what you're doing for me, pick out certain key topics, which I named a whole bunch of themes that I would like it to bold for me to make it easier for the users. The point being that you can tell language models what you want. And it's really up to how imaginative or creative you want to be. The other thing I mentioned was the news article, where I said for all those, in this case I just imported 7 new Federal Registers. For all 7 of those, just summarize them for me, as if I'm going to write a news release. So I'll import that. And again, because of the uniqueness issue, let me just change the title here so that Drupal thinks that this is actually a new article. Okay, created one article. And here we go. So this is totally written by an LLM. I wouldn't publish it as is, that's cheating, but it's a point of departure, keeps you honest, might be an aid. Actually, this brings up a point I wanted to mention. You'll note here that I have a little disclaimer. This article contains AI-generated summaries. I personally consider this to be basic due diligence. That we're all besides being developers in this case, we're also consumers of content. I think it's only being honest to let people know what they're getting. So I advise my clients that they should always put this kind of disclaimer in, so people know. As Drupal people, I'd also mention that personally, I'm not sure where we're going with any of this stuff. And I created, for my websites, I've created something called AI tags. In this case, I've got 3 of them. One for AI-generated text, which is what we're doing here, and then AI-generated entity extraction. That might be if you're pulling out things like numeric information, like penalties or rules or whatever. And then if we're going to be doing classification, I have a tag for AI-generated categories. This is because it's hard to know where we're going with any of this stuff, and I feel it's probably a good idea to tag your content. You wouldn't be displaying this to end users necessarily, but you might want to do it for your own internal bookkeeping. So let me quickly move to another use of LLMs. So this is another EPA-related website. This is where they have, if you're some, evildoer and you're being penalized or sanctioned, this is where the information is published. All well and good, but there's a number of things that are not ideal. One thing is there's not a whole lot of information here directly. We have a date, a description, and then there's a details page. So let's say we go to the details page. Okay, there's a lot of information here, granted, and there's also some fairly lengthy PDF files, like a consent decree and a complaint. This is all great, but still, if I want a quick summary of what's going down here, this is not necessarily going to help me. It would be nice, and this is what I did in my demo, is if we take all the text from this details page, extract all the text from these PDFs, have this big blob of text, send it up to Gemini and say, hey, just break this down for me, simplify it for me, give me a 4-paragraph summary. So that's a great use of LLMs. And you can craft the prompt, of course, to your particular use case. If whatever your organization is doing or whatever the different populations of users you've got, you can break it down in different ways. The other thing I would like to do is In this particular case, what specific law was broken? So here, looks like it was Section 203A3B of the Clean Air Act. I want to actually pick that out and bring it into Drupal as a separate field, because Drupal is all about structured content. Was there a penalty, a dollar penalty of some kind? That to me is something I want to bring into Drupal, because then I can make a Drupal view and allow people to sort on penalty. Like, who got penalized the most in the year 2024? The EPA doesn't do that for you, but you can do it in your own website. So again, before LLMs came out, you would have had to have people tediously go through dozens of pages of these things. Just prohibitive if you're a small organization. And I only work with small organizations. I don't work for a Fortune 500 company that has people and resources to do that. LLMs have totally changed the game as to what you can conceive of. So the only piece of code I'm going to show you with here is, this is a more complicated model. I mentioned the Pydantic model before. So I'll simply mention that I have two models. One is the highest level model is called legal analysis, and from the Drupal side, if I look at the Drupal content type, so if I go to content types, I set up a content type called document, and it's different from the built-in basic page, because in this case we have environmental issues. That's actually a taxonomy I created for the sake of this demo. If we look at environmental issues, we have a bunch of terms here that are related to the EPA, automobiles and trucks, chemicals, drinking water, hazardous waste. One of the things I'm going to ask the LLM to do is look at the particular document that you're analyzing and categorize it according to one of these. Or if you can't categorize it, then don't. The reason I want to use Pydantic is because, let's say the LLM is getting creative on me, hallucinations, and it says, oh, this document is about something else. It might be that that's really interesting, but it's not of interest to me because my user population is only interested in these themes. So I want to tell the LLM, don't do that. Don't categorize stuff unless it's a term I've got inside Drupal. So that's part of the development process where you have a schema. Again, getting past the low-level code, which took me a while to develop, and I used ChatGPT to help me build the code because I'm not an expert at this stuff, but it really is very helpful. So in this case, for example, environmental issues is a list. Here's my description: the environmental issues the document touches upon. It can be an empty list if you can't find one of my issues. And then I have a bunch of other instructions related to other fields, like penalty. If we go back here, penalty, this field right here, it should be a float. Laws is, again, what section of the EPA Clean Air Act was violated. I want a list of those, because my user population just wants, just give it to me straight. And I'll mention raw text. So as I said a moment ago, we're going to grab all these PDFs and all the other texts on the website and just make this big blob of text, which is great for an LLM to analyze, but it's horrible for people. On the other hand, it might be useful in the future, as a Drupal person. It might be that we want to use it for full text search, It might be that we want to run it against ChatGPT in the future for some unknown reason, right? We have my boss comes to me and says, "Hey, we want to look for a different set of material, a different set of tags." I don't have to then go back and rerun the web scraping all over again. I can say, "Oh, no problem. I already got the raw text." So the idea is I'm simply going to store the raw text in Drupal, but I'm not going to show it to end users. So that's what that is. So let's actually bring in, I'm not even going to, well, I'm going to try running this.
About 9 minutes left.
Okay, so I'll wrap this up very quick. I'm just going to say, just give me one.
Question about strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find it more helpful to build the content type in Drupal before you do the model, or do you do the model and then build your Drupal content type after?
Drupal first. Drupal first. Again, because think of it this way, what would you have done before LLMs were out?
Yeah.
So that worked. This was successful, so I'll go over here. I'll go over to my feed. My feeds, I'll go to Documents. I'll click Import. Created one document. And I go here. So this article contains AI-generated summaries. So here's the summary. It's properly categorized. I'm saying properly. I'm hoping it's not a hallucination. But in my experience, when you use those pedantic data models and tell ChatGPT or Gemini exactly what you want, they're very reliable in my own testing. So I'd highly encourage you, if you're going to do this kind of work, to be patient and just iterate a lot until you're comfortable. So it properly categorized it. It picked out the particular law at issue. Apparently there was no penalty directly. Well, I'm actually not sure. I'd have to look to see if there was actually a penalty that wasn't picked out, or if there wasn't a penalty in this case, just a warning. And of course, we always provide the source URL for people who want to go to the original. So I realized that was a lot. I'm sorry if I went too fast or I skipped over things. Again, all the code is up on the internet for anybody who wants it, as well as slides for the talk, which sort of break things down visually as to what we were doing. So I'm happy to take any questions, hear any comments. Sure.
Like the last one didn't pick up the penalty. I mean, we could go and check whether there was one or not. Any idea about the strategy to maybe do some kind of QA checks on those? Like maybe using another LLM to test the work?
Absolutely. One thing that people are doing these days, especially if you're doing something that you absolutely 100% need to have accurate information, people are doing pipelines where they do exactly that. They'll ask 3 different LLMs to cross-check things. Or everybody summarize something and then have a 4th LLM assess the quality of the 3 other ones. And you can either do that writing your own code, or there's frameworks like LangChain which do that for you. But that's a very good question, and yes, if you want to have really good quality, it always pays to do something like that.
You could also tell it to double check.
You could tell it to double check. You could ask it to check its own work. There's now these longer thinking models that they cost more to use, but instead of giving you an instantaneous answer, they'll think for a little bit longer. And again, that might be something that's worth paying for. Even if it costs 10 cents for a document, it might be cheaper than paying a person, a lot of dollars per hour to do the same work.
In your experience, have any of the models been better? Did you have favorites?
At this point in time, the foundation models are all really good. This wasn't true a year ago, but at this point, it's sort of like the old debate between Mac versus PC. It was a meaningful debate at one point in time, but then it ceased to be a meaningful debate because they were both really good. I'd say that's where we are. In this particular case, I'm using Gemini because it has, actually it's the least expensive foundation model right now, and it has the long context window, so what's not to like? But Anthropic, for example, depending on what your use case is, Anthropic, in my experience, is the best at coding. So, certainly for interactive use, I actually prefer Claude for doing computer coding.
Have you used this technique or process for events? So a use case for our universities is trying to find events that are in the local area. Usually by the time they find it and post it on their site, it's passed. There's been like requests to somehow have an aggregator to blend calendars together, and we just haven't found a proper solution.
I'm not sure how large language models would help in that case.
So a dream idea is if there was a local organization, they could use